The state does not protect you. People have fallen victim to the maintenance of the illusion that the public is somehow being protected by the state. This truly is the primary reason of the people's popular allegiance to the state. Most people seem to fear nothing as much as insecurity and chaos. A state, perceived by society as failing to provide elementary levels of protection against even common criminals, would have considerable difficulty retaining public sympathy and in the long run retaining power. Public officials know this, from politicians to judges to police chiefs to district attorneys. They all recognize that they must be able to maintain at least the illusion of efficiency and honesty among large sectors of society, particularly the influential, in order to preserve popular support for themselves. When you really take a look at contemporary state-run justice systems, some of the features most expected are the features noticeably absent. It would be expected that the bulk of police resources would be allocated for the prevention of severe violence against people as the first order of business. Protection of the property of citizens against thieves and burglars and so on would be second, petty theft and minor assaults would be next, and victimless activities like drug use and prostitution would receive the least amount of attention or perhaps no attention at all. The problem is, the exact opposite is true. In some metropolitan areas, prostitution enforcement is the single largest item in the police budget. A study was conducted on 16 of the nation's largest cities. It was discovered that only 28% of reported violent crimes result in arrest. On average, police in these cities made as many arrests for prostitution as for all violent offenses. Boston, Cleveland, and Houston arrested twice as many people for prostitution as they did for all homicides, all rapes, all robberies, and all assaults combined, while perpetrators evaded arrest for 90% of these violent crimes. Many police departments also devote a full 50% of their resources to drug enforcement. At the same time, large numbers of homicides continue to go uninvestigated in major cities, and in poor communities, many police departments don't even gather fingerprints at the scene of ordinary burglaries, and that's if they even show up at all. So what's going on here? What's wrong here? Well, they determine policy on the basis of demands made by special interest groups. The goal becomes not to control or reduce serious crimes, but to contain such criminal activity within those geographical areas populated by people lacking wealth, influence, or political power, particularly ethnic minorities and the poor. This is why you see 5 times as many patrol officers in wealthier, more influential sections of cities than in the poor ones. Response time to emergency calls is typically much shorter in well-to-do neighborhoods than in poor ones. The principal motivating factor for criminal justice officials are budgets, careers, political pressures, and media relations. And this explains why prostitution enforcement is sometimes the largest expenditure in the budgets of metropolitan police forces. Prostitution is a consensual activity, a misdemeanor in most jurisdictions, and a means of support for many poor and drug-addicted women. Prostitutes are a source of easy arrest and easy but exciting police work, and they use prostitution arrest to inflate the overall arrest statistics, which provides justification for a larger police budget. Vice squads are a source of relatively safe employment for police and a means of career advancement. Opposition to prostitutes, particularly street prostitutes, who are the ones being persecuted by the police, comes primarily from well-to-do and politically connected business and civic interests who view the presence of prostitutes on the streets, or should I say their streets, as a threat to their own interests, their own class position and property values and lifestyle interests. So driving prostitutes out of middle-class areas becomes a more important law enforcement objective than preventing homicides and armed robberies in poor areas. Furthermore, campaigns against street prostitution receive a fair amount of media attention and consequently serve the public relations interest, giving the illusion that the state is, quote, cleaning up the streets. It's the same thing with drug enforcement. A handful of big political, economic, and cultural interest groups benefit substantially from organized state persecution of people who use and sell certain drugs. A fair amount of law enforcement activity is simply a cover for the pursuit of the agendas of private economic interest operating in collusion with government. They go after the enforcement of zoning and licensing laws and land use regulations, building codes, property maintenance requirements, prohibitions against vending and peddling or drinking or sleeping in public. And this serves primarily to advance the interest of larger businesses. This is how they increase the value of their property. They stifle competition from smaller ones and artificially inflate the value of the property of the relatively well-to-do by suppressing the activities of small property holders, small entrepreneurs, and the destitute. And the result is a decrease in affordable housing, a decrease in business opportunities, a decrease in employment, a decrease in cultural and recreational activities available for the poor. In Richmond, Virginia, a program called Blitz to Bloom was put into place whereby large numbers of police and other government agents like building and zoning inspectors are sent into these targeted low-income areas, typically those populated by minorities, for the purpose of evicting poor tenants who can't even speak English from substandard housing, shutting down home businesses, arresting people for victimless crimes like drug use and prostitution, driving away street-level entrepreneurs, and effectively destroying the cultural and economic life of the community. These are government-financed efforts to tear down old residential buildings and replace them with newer, higher-rent facilities and establish commercial operations on real estate confiscated from the previous owners through eminent domain. And then it's sold at below market value cost to these politically connected and commercial interests who are then put into place. Another superhero characteristic of the state are these murderous SWAT thugs and narcotics agents and these law enforcement clowns who blow away people in these ridiculous drug raids, and they're rarely removed from their jobs, much less brought up on criminal charges. You know, one of the most amazing and amusing hypocrisies displayed by law enforcement is the dereliction of duty when their own self-interest is actually threatened. Because on one hand, these guys go out of their way to enforce the pettiest of regulations and laws, and they often justify their actions with excuses like, I'm only doing my job, or I don't make the laws, I just enforce the laws, which confirms the overregulation of law enforcement. But on the other hand, you know, this solemn commitment to the rule of law and their professional duty suddenly vanishes during moments of real danger. I mean, look at the LA riots in '92. The LAPD, who is supposed to be the largest and best trained police department in the world, turned and ran for cover. The police fled, while the property of small store owners was being destroyed. And then Korean merchants who were victims of racist attacks and defended their own property were later arrested for gun law violations. So, you know, there's your superhero state. What about the Columbine Massacre in '99, okay? All of these SWAT teams who are normally so bold in their attacks on the homes of drug suspects who, of course, aren't expecting them to kick in the door with tear gas. These cops hid for hours behind ambulances and fire trucks, cowering in fear of two teenage dickheads with ordinary handguns. So this is a state that can't even maintain law and order in its capital cities. It can't even maintain order in the event of natural disasters like, you know, the New Orleans floods. This empire is a house of cards that maintains an elaborate smoke and mirror show as a means of hiding its fundamental weakness and total incompetence. And as for the Americans' means of gunboat diplomacy, okay, we're talking about the same U.S. military that was defeated by ragtag insurgents in the jungles of Vietnam, was defeated in the mountains of Afghanistan, was defeated in the streets of Baghdad. So what kinds of conditions has this sorry-ass state of American criminal justice and protection from international threats really brought about? The state is like a superhero in a fat suit. The state is not protecting you. The state is protecting itself from you.